Hey guys, and welcome back. Thanks for all the positivity that we got again last week. Last week's video, we got more likes on the video we released than any video that we've released up to this point, and we're really appreciative of that. If you're interested, you can subscribe to this channel and get notifications of when we release our weekly college football pick videos. And once college basketball season rolls around, we're going to be releasing these videos on more of a daily basis. So you have that to look forward to. And also, if you want more pick content in the article form beyond just basically what we talk about in this video, you can head over to stumpthespread.com and you can get our free picks there as well as our premium picks. I will link stumpthespread.com in the description, and if I can figure out how to get a link to Stump the Spread on the video, then I'm going to be doing that. So that's pretty much it for the intro of this video. Now we're going to be jumping into the matchups. I have quite a long list. I think this is actually one of my longer lists in terms of games that I'm going to be talking about this week, so I'm not going to try to spend too much time on each matchup just so this video doesn't get ridiculous in terms of how long it is. But I'm just going to do what I normally do, which is go over all of the weekday matchups and then go over a healthy handful of games on Saturday. So starting with the first game here, we have two MAC games on Tuesday. And I really love November just because of the earlier week matchups that we get. But both of these games have pretty large spreads, so we'll start with Bowling Green State versus Northern Illinois. So the Huskies haven't been performing up to their preseason expectations. They're sitting kind of in the basement of the much tougher MAC West division right now. But this was a team that was supposed to be able to compete in the upper tier of the conference, but that just hasn't been the case. The Huskies did look better in their last outing. And then you have Bowling Green, who's obviously really fallen off as a football program, and that's, a lot of that has to do with just talented upperclassmen either graduating or transferring to bigger schools, and also losing their head coach doesn't help. So in this one, we will be siding with Bowling Green just because this feels like far too many points for Northern Illinois to be giving, even though the Huskies did look a lot better in their last outing. The Huskies haven't been consistent enough for us to feel confident in them giving this many points. So Western Michigan has been consistently dominating action in the MAC this year. Ball State has been kind of a mid-tier MAC team as expected. This is a ton of points to give on the road in the MAC, and even though we really don't love this one, if we had to take it, we would side with Western Michigan giving the points. Even though, going on the road and picking up a blowout win is never easy, especially in one of these midweek MAC matchups. So it'll be interesting to see how the Broncos handle themselves, but this group has been consistent all year long, and we expect them to continue this week as they win and in convincing fashion as they get the cover. Toledo and Akron, so you have the Rockets, who were supposed to compete right with Western Michigan atop the MAC West this year. Toledo is coming off of a surprise defeat last week in upset fashion. Toledo was rather significant favorites against the Ohio Bobcats, but they ended up losing that game. So we really do like this Toledo squad, but it looks like they've been getting somewhat complacent, and perhaps this loss against Ohio will kind of get this team back on the right track as they still control their own destiny in the conference with a later matchup against Western Michigan. And then you have Akron, who's been a really tough team to gauge this year. They've been pretty up and down, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where they've shown the ability to really put up tremendous amount of points, but also be a bit inconsistent on this side of the ball. Just based on where we like both these teams, we're a lot higher on Toledo, even though they haven't been quite playing up to their potential. We do like the Rockets to bounce back here on the road. It would be a lot more attractive if this was at a touchdown or slightly below a touchdown, but with where it is right now, we'll be slightly favoring Toledo in this one, given the points on the road. Now we have Buffalo and Ohio, another MAC matchup. So Ohio, they haven't been playing up to the high expectations people had set for them in the preseason, but obviously this group is coming off that confidence-building win on the road against Toledo, and even though Ohio hasn't quite played up to their expectations, they're still in the driver's seat in the weaker MAC East, and they're really not having too bad of a season. It's just the Bobcats have been a little more inconsistent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, than you'd like to see out of a veteran group like this. And then you have Buffalo, who's sitting in the basement of the conference. Buffalo has shown a couple games where they were a bit more competitive, and just given the inconsistencies that we've seen out of the Bobcats this year, this feels like far too many points for them to be handing in a conference game, even against an opponent like Buffalo. So we'll be siding with the Bulls here in the points. Arkansas State and Georgia State. So you have the Red Wolves, who got off to a really terrible start this year. And the Red Wolves were supposed to compete for the Sun Belt Conference, and they've really shown that more in conference play, now standing in the driver's seat as they try to win the conference. And then you have Georgia State, who really closed last year strong, and people were thinking that maybe the Panthers would carry that over into this season, but that really hasn't been the case for this group. Arkansas State's definitely heading in a positive direction right now, and we like for them to come through here on the road against the Panthers. Oklahoma State and Iowa State. So the Sooners got up to a pretty slow start this year, obviously going against a pretty tough schedule, and then once they've got into conference play, they've been looking a lot better. And then you have Iowa State, that their record obviously shows that they're having a pretty tough season, but at least the Cyclones have been pretty competitive, especially in a number of Big 12 matchups, and the Cyclones will get their shot at maybe picking up a conference win or another conference win once they get their matchup against Kansas. But right here, you get Oklahoma State, who's been tremendous on the offensive side of the ball this year, but their defense has been a bit shaky. And then you have Iowa State, who's been pretty decent on their home field. This has gone from -18 to -21, and getting the full 3 touchdowns on their home field, it just feels like the Cyclones have the betting value here in this midweek matchup. Moving down to UCLA and Colorado. So Colorado, they were expected to take a step forward this year, and they've definitely been doing that. And then you have UCLA, who came into the year as one of the favorites to win the Pac-12 title, but they obviously haven't been able to live up to those expectations. Then obviously QB Josh Rosen being out hasn't helped their outlook much. So you have Colorado here as they started at 9-point favorites. They've moved up to 12. Even though we do really like this Colorado squad, this spread does seem to be getting a bit out of control. UCLA still has talent, and they've been competitive in a lot of their Pac-12 matchups, and this is one of those games where if Colorado, overlooks their opponent just because of where UCLA stands in the Pac-12, they could be liable for the upset. And even though we do like Colorado to come through straight up, we do think UCLA getting the points is the better value bet in that situation. All right, another MAC game here. We have Central Michigan against Miami, Ohio. So Central Michigan, they've been a pretty solid performer on the road this year, obviously with their upset win coming against Oklahoma State, and they also have a nice MAC road win against Northern Illinois under their belt. And then you have Miami, Ohio, who's definitely heading in the right direction right now as a program, but still more of a mid-tier team in the conference. And, coming out of the MAC East, which is a bit less competitive than the MAC West, where Central presides. This has gone from -6 down to -3. People have been liking what they've been seeing out of Miami, Ohio in recent results, but we do think that the Chippewas are going to get back on track here as they go on the road and have a nice road performance as they go on to win and cover this manageable spread. Temple in Connecticut, you have the Owls, who are definitely building a lot of positive momentum, and you've been seeing that in their results recently. And then you have UConn, who was expecting to take a step forward this year as a football program, but that simply hasn't been the case. And Connecticut's coming off a pretty embarrassing loss in their last outing. So Temple, they bring all the momentum into this matchup, and I expect this spread to perhaps even grow from here over 10.5. If Temple continues to show the kind of poise and confidence that they've had in recent matchups, then we do like the Owls to come through here against the Huskies as they win and cover this spread. All right, and then our last midweek matchup game to close things out on Friday night, we have San Jose State against Boise State. San Jose State clearly not living up to their expectations this year. They were supposed to maybe be a mid to possibly even upper tier team based on what many thought out of them in the preseason. We didn't feel this way about the Spartans, given they're not the strongest team in the trenches even for a Mountain West Conference squad, and that's really been the downside to this squad this year, as they've really struggled to compete at a high level. And then you have Boise State, who's coming off their devastating loss on the road against Wyoming, and the Broncos no longer control their own destiny in the Mountain West Conference. It's going to be interesting to see how Boise State bounces back. You'd expect on their home field that they'd be able to bounce back and get this win in rather convincing fashion, but giving over 4 touchdowns just seems excessive. San Jose State probably needs to score about 2 touchdowns to have an excellent shot at covering a spread of this size, and we think that the Spartans have enough on the offensive side of the ball where they should be able to do this. So we're going to be cautiously siding here with the Spartans and given the over 4 touchdowns as the better value play here. Alright, so moving on to our Saturday matchups. The first game of the day, we have Navy versus Notre Dame. Always a really fun game to watch. You see this one's gone from -4.5 to -6.5, and this is mainly because Navy's coming off that defeat on the road against USF. Even though they were able to make things interesting at the end of the fourth quarter, they still didn't look great through about 3/4 of that game before rallying. And then you have Notre Dame, who's been a really hard team to figure out this year. They have talent, but inconsistent play has really plagued this squad, and Notre Dame has gone against, some tough opponents, and they have shown the ability to compete against tough opponents, and the Irish are coming off a pretty nice win at home against a Miami squad that's better than their record would indicate. Navy obviously at one point was ranked this year, especially coming off their earlier surprise win against Houston, but that win's not looking quite as good with how the Cougars have been playing in recent weeks. We do think that Navy can keep things respectable in this one, but given Notre Dame's coming off a really nice confidence-building win against a pretty physical team, we do think that the Irish will be able to outclass the midshipmen here just based on talent alone. So unless this one goes over a touchdown, we will be siding with Notre Dame here as the better value bet. BYU and Cincinnati. So the Cougars have gone against an incredibly tough schedule so far this year, but things kind of wind down for the Cougars down the stretch in what should be a more manageable portion through the month of November, and that should really allow the Cougars to get to bowl eligibility. And then you have Cincinnati, who was supposed to be a mid-tier and maybe even perhaps lower upper tier team in the AAC this year, but the Bearcats really haven't been able to live up to these expectations. Interestingly, the spread has gone from 10 points down to -7.5. We're not really sure why that is, given the fact that Cincinnati hasn't been looking all that great this year, and they're coming off a pretty rough result in their last outing in a losing effort. So if Jamal Williams is able to go, that's a big boost for BYU. The BYU run game is pretty lethal, not just with a guy like Jamal Williams, but also their quarterback can pull the ball and get some pretty solid yardage. If this could get down to a touchdown, we'd feel even better about BYU, but given where it currently is, we will be cautiously siding with the Cougars in this one. Air Force and Army, a great matchup, great rivalry between these armed forces universities. Air Force has been a huge disappointment in the Mountain West Conference this year, but this squad still does have the kind of talent where they are a threat, and they still can get to that bowl game that they're looking for this year. And then you have Army, who's been a really tough team to gauge. They've shown some extremely impressive results this year, and also some rather disappointing results in games that they were expected to do well in. Army is coming off a pretty nice win in their last outing, getting that upset on the road against Wake Forest. Air Force is going back-to-back on the road. It is worth noting the status of Nate Romine coming into this one. If Romine's able to go, that will give Air Force an extra boost. But even without Romine, these triple option offenses generally have pretty decent options in the waiting in the wings, just because when you have a quarterback that runs as much as a triple option quarterback, you need to be ready with your next guys up. So this should be a really competitive game, and we will be cautiously siding with Air Force here. Given the under 3 points right now, but definitely look out for the status on Romine before you put any money on this one. Moving down to Louisville and Boston College, we really liked Virginia to cover last week on the road, at home against Louisville, and not only did they cover the 31-point spread, but they nearly upset the Cardinals. That was one of our better, highest confidence picks last week, in what was a pretty strong week for our premium picks over at Stump the Spread. I believe we went 7-2 against the spread last Saturday overall with our premium plays. But anyways, Louisville is going back-to-back on the road. We're not nearly as confident in this Boston College squad as we were going into last week with Virginia. Boston College has taken a big step back this year on the defensive side of the ball. They were one of the best teams defensively in the country last year, and that just hasn't been the case this go-around. Their offense is slightly better than last year's group, but Boston College has also shown that they're liable to get blown out by tougher competition, with some pretty embarrassing blowout defeats coming against, I believe, Virginia Tech and Clemson. Louisville has that blowout capability, and coming off not the best result last week on the road against Virginia, we do expect this squad to kind of be reinvigorated by that result as they go into this one and win in convincing fashion as they go on to cover this rather large spread. All right, let's see what's next on my list here. So Syracuse and Clemson. The Clemson Tigers were somewhat fortunate to get by Florida State last week. The Tigers didn't look so great on the defensive side of the ball going down the stretch, but the Tigers were able to do just enough to get the win. This isn't the first time Clemson has had things really tight down the stretch, and you know, this squad is liable to lose before they're able to get to the college playoff, but you know, to Clemson's credit, they have been able to get the job done in those close situations, even though you can probably chalk up the NC State win as more luck than anything, given the Wolfpack missed a field goal right there at the end in what was pretty much a chip shot that could have sent Clemson out of the top four. But then you have Syracuse here, who's definitely trending in the right direction. Their offense has really shown a lot of positive signs, even though, you know, this is a young team and they're still a work in process on the defensive side of the ball. They have shown the offensive ability where they should be able to move the ball somewhat here against Clemson. You can see, you know, based on some of these reasonings, you've already seen the spread go from -28 to about -27 to -26.5. We do like Syracuse definitely if this goes back up to the full 4 touchdowns, but even at the current status, we will be siding with the orange here as the better value bet. Moving down to Florida State versus North Carolina State. We like this Florida State squad. Obviously, they haven't lived up to their full potential this year, but they're still a really talented group, and obviously when you have a guy like Dalvin Cook leading your offensive unit, you're a huge threat on the offensive side of the ball. North Carolina State has been a really tough team to gauge this year. You know, you had their result like in their near upset against Clemson, but then you have another result like last week where NC State's favored by a significant margin and they go on to lose. This has just been a really frustrating squad that's been very inconsistent. Florida State probably feels a bit frustrated with their loss last week at home against Clemson, feeling that they probably gave up some opportunities there to perhaps pull out the win in the end, but you know, so it goes for Florida State. They've gone against a pretty tough schedule this year, and they've been able to show us some nice signs, but they've been, you know, a little inconsistent. But we do like the Seminoles here to get back on track and bounce back against the North Carolina State that's just been a really tough team to figure out. Maryland and Michigan, you have a Maryland squad that appears to be heading in the right direction under their new coaching staff. Maryland hasn't necessarily gone against the toughest slate in terms of what most Big Ten teams have faced this year, but obviously Maryland's getting a huge test here on the road against Michigan with the spread going from -26.5 already up to -30. Michigan didn't look tremendous last week on the road against Michigan State, but the Wolverines were able to hold on and get the win against their rival. Michigan hasn't had all that much success against Michigan State in recent years, and it was a good sign for the program that they were able to come through and get past their rival on the road, especially given the kind of season Michigan State's been having. There's no denying that Michigan has been absolutely dominant on their home field all season, and we don't really expect that to change here. So even giving this large amount of points, we do still think that Michigan is the better value bet here. Moving down to Oklahoma State versus Kansas State. Oklahoma State surprised a lot of people last week with their upset win at home against the previously undefeated West Virginia Mountaineers. That was a really nice sign for this squad. As you know, Oklahoma State's been showing consistent offensive performance this year, but their defense has been a big question mark. And you know, a lot of their win last week against West Virginia was because the defense was able to slow down that West Virginia attack, which was pretty impressive. And then you have Kansas State, who's kind of been flying under the radar, having, you know, a pretty mediocre season, being able to keep their head above water and beating the opponents that they're supposed to beat, and, you know, maybe coming up short in some of their tougher matchups. Kansas State, consistently overlooked. That's just how it is in the Big 12 for this squad, but they have been much more competitive this year than what they showed last year, and they have been able to stay a bit more healthy, which is nice for the Wildcats. I feel like a lot of people are going to be overlooking Kansas State coming into this one with Oklahoma State coming off a pretty nice resume-building win. We do like Kansas State to hold things down here on their home field. They do have the better defense overall, and we do think that they're going to be able to hold Oklahoma State more in check this week as they go on to win and cover this pretty small spread on their home field. East Carolina and Tulsa, so the Pirates have not even close to lived up to their expectations this year, but they are coming off a nice result in their win last week. And then you have Tulsa. We expected them to take a nice step forward this year as a football team, and they've actually even been performing better than we expected. Their offense has been pretty incredible in some of their matchups, and once this Tulsa offense gets rolling, they're really tough to slow down. This spread has already gone from -5.5 to over a touchdown, unfortunately. Obviously, under the touchdown, it's a tremendous value bet, but even where it is right now, we still think that this Tulsa squad is the better value play here. Texas Christian and Baylor. So Baylor's coming off their really tough defeat on the road against Texas in a game that Baylor actually had tremendous success on the offensive side of the ball, but they were just unable to hold off Texas in, what was a game where the Horns were actually able to utilize their home field advantage as they went out to pull out that upset in what was a really tremendous game. And then you have Texas Christian, who was a preseason top 25 squad that just hasn't been able to live up to those expectations. And then you have another situation like last week where TCU was rather significant favorites at home against a squad like Texas Tech, who's shown nothing on the defensive side of the ball this year. And TCU wasn't even able to have, great results on the offensive side of the ball in that matchup. And that was on their home field in a losing effort. So we're pretty low on this TCU squad right now, given what we've seen out of them this year. And then, obviously, if Seth Russell's able to go, we do give Baylor the nod here on their home field, given the 9 points. Pittsburgh and Miami. So you have Miami, who's coming off yet another defeat in a tough game. Miami opened up the season really strong, standing 4-0. But, Miami has fallen off, losing their last 4 games in a row, but to Miami's defense, they have been going against a pretty taxing schedule over the past month, and they are better than their 4-4 record would suggest. And then you have Pittsburgh, who's, last year they built their team off of their defensive strength, but that just hasn't been the case this year, as Pittsburgh has one of the worst overall defenses in the ACC based on the numbers they've been giving up. We really do not like what we've been seeing out of this Pittsburgh defense, and here on the road, we do expect Miami to take advantage as they go on to build a lead and as they go on to win and cover the spread at home as the best value bet. Georgia Tech and North Carolina, the Yellow Jackets, we're hoping to have a bounce back year as a program, and they have been able to pick up some wins, but they've largely been not the most impressive team in the ACC, kind of, bowing to the more tougher teams that they've gone against. So, and then you have North Carolina, who's kind of been an interesting team. They've really dominated on the road and looked like one of the best road teams in the country actually this year, but on their home field they've been a little less consistent, which is kind of surprising. We do really like this North Carolina offense, and their defense is still, adequate in ACC terms. So we do like North Carolina to really put up some big offensive numbers in this one and just get just enough from their defense to go on to cover this 10-point spread. Even though North Carolina has been a bit shakier on their home field, we do like them to come through here against the Yellow Jackets. Georgia and Kentucky, you have a Georgia squad that's really disappointed after getting off to a 3-0 start. This squad has pretty much fallen off the map, especially in conference play, coming off a 14-point defeat in their last outing against rival Florida. After getting off to a pretty decent start in that game, they just weren't able to put up anything consistently on the offensive side of the ball down the stretch. And then Kentucky has just been our bread and butter this year. For some reason, Kentucky seems to be consistently undervalued in SEC play, and we've been taking them fairly consistently as a premium play at Stump the Spread. They have been, I think they've covered in every single SEC game other than their, no, I think they have actually. So Kentucky remains actually in the hunt in the weaker SEC East, given they've been able to take care of business against what has been a more manageable SEC slate. Kentucky has been consistently undervalued on their home field, where they've been rather consistent underdogs, and they've actually been able to come through and win quite consistently on their home field. And we feel like if Kentucky continues to pound the ball, especially like they showed last week on the road against Missouri in that convincing blowout result, then they should be able to have a pretty good shot here against Georgia. So we like Kentucky again this week to cover getting the points on their home field. Moving down to Florida and Arkansas, we're not as high on Florida as the pollsters seem to be. Even though Florida was able to come through last week against Georgia, we're just not all that impressed with this Florida offensive unit, even though they do boast one of the better defenses, especially in the SEC East. Florida is going on the road to an SEC West opponent in Arkansas, who's, you know, they've kind of been flying under the radar this year. This is a pretty good team, and if they were in any other division other than the SEC West, they'd probably be a bit higher in the rankings, just given they'd probably have more wins. But behind their home field advantage, we do think that Arkansas getting the points here is a pretty solid value bet. Utah State and Wyoming. So Utah State was supposed to be a factor in the Mountain West Conference this year, and that clearly hasn't been the case as the Aggies sit in the basement of their division. And then we expected Wyoming to take a rather large step forward this year as a program, but even we didn't expect this much success. That was another strong value play that we had last week on our premium side of things, with Wyoming getting the full 2 touchdowns at home against Boise State. We really felt the Cowboys had a ton of value in that particular matchup. Obviously, we weren't expecting Wyoming to pick up the win straight up, but we did think they had a chance, and you know, they had the ball bounce their way there at the end as they went on to upset Boise State with the safety. Wyoming, you can see they've been getting pretty consistently undervalued this year by Vegas, especially in conference play, and this thing started at -3, but people are finally catching on to Wyoming, and they've bet this up to nearly a touchdown at this point. We'd like to keep this under a touchdown, and with that in mind, we do still like Wyoming in this one, but if this gets over a touchdown, we'd probably hold off on it more, but at its current state, we do still think that Wyoming has the better value bet going against a Utah State squad that's really struggled at a fairly consistent rate this year in the Mountain West Conference. All right, let's see where I am on my list here. All right, so next game we have is FIU against Western Kentucky. Florida International got off to a pretty slow start this year, but they have been a bit more competitive here recently. Florida International nearly upset MTSU last week at home, which would have been a really nice win for this program. Middle Tennessee State is comparable with Western Kentucky in terms of some of the better teams in the Conference USA. Western Kentucky looked tremendous in their last outing, getting the blowout win. This does feel like a ton of points to give, and if Alex Magoo is able to go for Florida International, we do like the Golden Panthers getting over the 4 touchdowns on the road here. Washington and California, you have the Huskies going back-to-back on the road, which can be tricky, especially in the Pac-12 conference. And then you have Cal, who's really consistently shown up on the offensive side of the ball this year, with their defense being more of a liability. Washington is coming off a really competitive win on the road against Utah in what was a more physical matchup. You can see, obviously, going back-to-back on the road, people are betting this one down a bit, going from -17 already to -16 to -15.5. We do think that California, behind their home field advantage, will be able to keep things somewhat competitive. Even though we don't see the Golden Bears having a shot at the upset here, we do think that they can keep things competitive enough where they cover the spread on their home field. Oregon and Southern Cal, the USC Trojans have been really quite impressive actually on their home field this year. And then you have Oregon, who's been a huge disappointment. Oregon was at one point a top 25 team, but obviously with all of their defeats and a couple of really bad blowout losses really beating this team's resume down. And right now Oregon's pretty much just trying to play to keep their head coach's job, because, you know, with how disappointing this squad has been this year, the fans have been getting a bit restless at Oregon. They're not used to these kind of results, given what we've seen out of the Oregon football program over the past decade plus. Oregon did look better in their last outing, getting by Arizona State rather convincingly at home, and that should be a confidence booster for Oregon going into this road matchup against Southern California. Even though Southern Cal has been solid at home, and we have rather consistently liked USC to cover on their home field. This just feels like too many points, already going from minus 14 to minus 17. So, and Oregon should be building a bit more confidence coming off that solid result in their last outing. So we will be taking the Ducks here and the considerable amount of points as the better value bet. Hawaii and San Diego State. So San Diego State, they were, they've been actually quite an interesting team this year. So they were dominating on the offensive side of the ball, but their defense was getting gashed on a consistent basis. But San Diego State's kind of flipped the script here in Mountain West Conference play with their defense really stepping up in an impressive way, really kind of dominating their opposition in the Mountain West Conference, while their offense has still been a rather consistent performer behind one of the best tailbacks in the country with Pumphrey. And then Hawaii, obviously opening the season against a tremendously difficult schedule. Hawaii has been able to get back on track in the Mountain West Conference and be much more competitive. We really like Hawaii in terms of, where Vegas has them ranked in terms of how we like them as a team. Hawaii, they've been able to avoid the overwhelming injuries that they've had to deal with in recent years, which has helped their cause. Obviously, Hawaii coming off the disappointing home loss in their last outing, but this group has shown that they can perform well on the road in Mountain West Conference play. Even though we do like San Diego State to pull away in this one and get the win, we do think that Hawaii has the betting advantage here, given the 3 full touchdowns right now. We would talk about this Texas and Texas Tech matchup, but obviously without knowing the issues with Patrick Mahomes right now and whether he's going to go or not, has this spread yet to be released. But moving down here, we have Memphis Southern Methodist. Memphis was looking like one of the better teams in the conference not too long ago, but the Tigers have fallen off in recent weeks, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They've really struggled, and that's not great news coming on the road here against an SMU squad who's really stepped up on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, with Matt Davis going out earlier in the year, that was tough for SMU to overcome, but they have definitely been showing really positive strides on the offensive side of the ball in recent weeks. And going against a Memphis defense that's really been struggling, we do like SMU given the points here on their home field as a pretty solid value bet. Moving down to Iowa against Penn State. Iowa obviously not living up to their expectations this year after winning their division last year. Iowa still does have quite a veteran roster with some talented players, and Penn State, they are getting a boost here given their blowout win last week against Purdue, and then obviously their nice upset win at home against Ohio State 2 weeks back. We do think that Penn State is getting bet up a little bit here, more than they deserve. We're still not all that high on Penn State, even given their recent results, so we're going to be siding with Iowa to keep things really competitive here, and don't even be surprised if Iowa's able to push for this upset, even as over a touchdown underdog. Alright, we don't have too many more games left here on our list. We got 3 more games that I'm going to be covering. So Alabama, LSU, one of the more intriguing matchups of the week. Alabama has been consistently dominating opponents, with really their only close game coming way back earlier in the year against Ole Miss on the road, but just for some reason the Rebels have had Alabama's number recently. And then you have LSU, who kind of started the year shaky, but since they fired Les Miles, the Tigers have been a bit more competitive and looking better. Both of these teams are coming off some rest, which should make this a really physical and just a great game to watch. Don't be surprised if this is a little lower scoring than what we've been seeing out of these teams over the past month. With that said, it's really hard to make a case going against Alabama, just given how consistently dominant they've been, even against some of the tougher teams they've faced. So we're going to be siding with the Crimson Tide here, given the around touchdown on the road. Another interesting matchup here, we have Wisconsin and Northwestern. Wisconsin didn't look quite as dominant as people were expecting last week on their home field against Nebraska, but the Badgers were able to deal the Huskers their first defeat of the season. Wisconsin has gone against a really tough Big Ten slate, and this is going to be another challenge for Wisconsin going on the road against a Northwestern squad that's often overlooked. So Northwestern was nearly able to upset Ohio State on the road last week, which was a really great result for the Wildcats, even though they weren't able to get the job done. With that said, we do like Wisconsin here. Now that this has gone from a full touchdown to just under a touchdown, we think that Wisconsin has just enough offensive output here to build a touchdown lead and then hold down Northwestern because of their strong defense. So this should be a lower scoring game, but even with that, we do like Wisconsin to pull through and cover this manageable spread. And then our last game here is Nebraska against Ohio State. This would have been a much more compelling game if Nebraska was coming in here as an undefeated team, but now going back-to-back on the road with going against Wisconsin last week, which is a pretty physical team, and now going against the Buckeyes, the Huskers could have a tough time, not just with dealing with Ohio State's physicality and athleticism, but also with the fact that Nebraska could be a bit fatigued here going back-to-back on the road. And then you have Ohio State, who's really vastly underperformed the last 2 weeks. You know, it's hard to forget that, you know, this is the same Ohio State squad that went on the road earlier in the year and just completely dominated a pretty strong Oklahoma squad, and you can't really forget that. Obviously, Ohio State, they're working through some things right now as a young team, but, you know, don't be surprised if Ohio State is able to get things back on track in the coming weeks. Ohio State does still control their own destiny in the Big Ten with an upcoming matchup at the end of the year at home against Michigan in what should be a pretty tremendous game. Nebraska does have the ability to stay competitive here, but the cards just do not seem to be in the Huskers' favor, you know, going back-to-back on the road in the Big Ten against two really physical opponents. So we'll be cautiously siding with the Buckeyes here, even though they are giving a tremendous amount of points as the better value bet. And that's going to be it for us. We covered quite a few games in this video. Pretty long video as a result, obviously, but I thanks all of you for those that have been able to stay through and watch this really long video. I hope that some of my suggestions and analysis is able to help you in some way. Again, if you can give the video a like, that'd be much appreciated. I'm really grateful to all of you who have been doing that. And then also you can click the subscribe button for more videos like this in the future. And then also you can head over to stumpthespread.com to get our free pick analysis as well as our premium plays if that's something you're interested in, and not just in college football, but we also cover the NFL, NBA, NHL, and then we have baseball obviously winding up right now, and we're getting amped up right now for the college basketball season, which is just a couple weeks away. Right now I'm studying up on all 350 plus college basketball teams, which is always really exciting every year as we get ready to try to, you know, beat the books early on in the year. So thanks guys for watching again, and I will be seeing you in next week's video.